Dun, dun, dun. Hello, it's me again. Oh, you don't know it's me again. I'm going straight in after the um, presentation video of earlier. I've just finished it. Need a drink to go again. Tea. Right. I just want to talk about money. Money. I'll do it quickly, and I don't know if this will go into a series, but I have the urge to talk about money this morning because it comes into so many conversations and so many people. It's like we're talking, most of this is, if we're not talking energy, we're talking money, and we don't know what money is. So I'll just tell you what money is, just easily like that, and then we'll know. Obviously it's not easy like that. Now, we'll see how I go about this. Right. Obviously, you've got to cut into history somewhere, so we'll cut in. I won't go exactly into the development of the Bank of England, but I'll go around there and talk about it in an open sort of way and not a direct, this is exactly what happened sort of way. Okay. The king stroke government. I'll call them king stroke government because we go through history and it'll either be, it's all different countries, but this basically goes the same for most countries. You know, different countries come into this story somewhere along through history, but it's based on this sort of thing. King stroke government in the past often needed money to beat the shit out of another king stroke government or defend themselves from another king stroke government in wartime. So there were always people, we'll leave out the Italians on this run through of the Italian banking houses that we call them. There were rich traders and merchants in the country at the time that the king stroke government wanted money. So the merchant said to the king, all right, we'll give you the money so you can fight this war. But you write us a receipt, a bit of paper, saying at least that you'll pay us back. That was done, the war was fought. Now, this would repeat again the next time, let's say. I'm just making it up as the next time. But the next time, the merchant said, well, that worked quite well, but what we want to do now is when you give us the receipt saying that you're going to pay us back, we want to trade those receipts among ourselves and to pay any taxes that we have back to you in these actual receipts. How about that? And the king government says, well, seems fine with me, no worries, let's go. So they'd go at it with that sort of way of doing things. Now this would work for the next war, the next war, the next war. What was actually happening here is the rich people, the 1%, had their own money now. Now, I think I've inspired to do this video as a comment reply I did to Sned this morning. But now what we have, God, I'll get myself confused if I go with this, but I'll throw it in. This is a big brackets kind of to Sned. In the banking system that we have at the moment, it isn't just a banking system. There are two systems. There is the banking system and the finance system. The banking system we can consider is just for between you, me and the banks and a few other small companies. We deal in money. The finance system deals in paper assets. Right, okay. Now, let's go back in history again to the Third War, where the 1% were dealing in these paper assets, the receipts from the king. They would just be re-signing them between each other, trading very efficiently, just signing over these paper assets. And it worked very well for them. They were never short of money because they had lots of paper assets from the deaths of the king stroke government to hand around and play between themselves. And they could do trading wonderfully efficiently with these paper assets. Underneath them at this time, I won't go into when it was, all right, the 16th, 17th century, the actual people, the 99%, were absolutely in terrible trouble because they did not have a regular, decent money to play with. And let's just leave it like that. The 1% were playing with the paper assets. They were absolutely fine. The 99% were scrimping and saving because the rich didn't bother with them, basically. There wasn't enough money for them. It was a real deflationary time. Okay? Okay. Do I want to go any further? Yeah, okay. As time went on and kings started going away that way and government started coming in this way to take over, and more people were voting and Parliament took more notice of the 99%, it was noted that the people didn't have money but the rich people did. And that 1% of money was eventually kind of pushed down and down and down as much more as possible into being used by the 99%. But the system that was used was the same top-down system, which was that everybody was to use receipts from the government now. The government borrowed money from the rich merchants and promised to pay it back. Now, these promises to pay back, I promise to pay the bearer the sum of this much money, the toffs, the 1%, could do this happily between themselves without squabbling too much, and without saying, well, you pay me what? As long as you had a receipt that said you had a grab on the government or the king's arse, this was good enough because then they could influence or use it or whatever. They were happy with that system. But as it was passed down to the 99%, the 99% got their piece of paper that said, I promise to pay the sum on demand. What exactly? And in the end, the government then had to say, well, we'll give you gold for it. You know, you don't have to just take our word for it that we'll give you something. We'll give you gold. And they go, well, all right then. So there were various times where the people had come in and say, well, they'd try it out and say, well, give me gold for this piece of paper. Then they'd get gold and go, oh, well, that was nice, and give the gold back and then take the piece of paper again. Okay, so time goes on. Hello, it's an interruption by me. I'm editing this and I realise I should throw in here that we can imagine, it's not quite true, but we can imagine, because I think it's very useful to imagine it this way, that banks were set up so as to have the same system working for the 99% that was working so well for the 1%. So the 1% dealt with the king's bits of paper, and that was fine for them. And they kind of said, well, have something for the rest of them, so set up banks that can do a similar sort of thing. So it's the banks that was representing the king, and then the bits of paper went out to the proletariat from the banks. Kind of a mini-me system of king and top 1% was set up where it was banks and the proletariat. It's not quite right, but it's a very useful way of imagining the system was, and it's really not that far off. Yeah. So the 1% dealing with the king's bit of paper, banks set up to give bits of paper to the proletariat to play with the same system as we'll give you a bit of paper that says we owe you something. And again, it worked for gold for a while, but really all bits of paper are all the same when it comes down to it. It says that somebody owes you something, but that generally is either used to be a bank, independent banks that could give out these bits of paper, but generally always it's now the government that owes you something, will give you something, but of course they won't. Now, back to me again. And we get whatever it was, 30 something, was it? Where the US government, it's a bit too exact, I wanted to keep it vague, but the US government said, you small people now, you can't convert those bits of paper into gold anymore. And US people have never been able, since then, been able to convert their paper into gold. But the outside world, the big trading world, could right up until 1971. In 1971, Nixon closing the gold window said even people out there, countries like France now, can't shop in their bits of paper for gold. So now, what do we have? We have people walking around with bits of paper, it doesn't matter what they say on them. The United States is slightly different because they're Federal Reserve notes. United Kingdom, they still have promised to pay I think they still say promised to pay the bearer the sum of £10, and that's meant to be £10 of gold, but it's not anymore. What you have is a piece of paper from the government saying that they will give you something. Now the people for, let's say, 100 years or so have not asked the question, well, what are you going to give me? Because there's no answer, because there's nothing the government is going to give you. It's just a piece of paper from the government saying that the government owes you a certain amount of something. And then you give it to the storekeeper, and then the storekeeper can demand off the government 10 somethings. What those somethings are, nothing, absolutely nothing at all. And what's the government going to give you? The best you're going to get is another piece of paper to replace your piece of paper if it's worn out, saying the government will give you 10 somethings. Yeah, that's all money is. It's a promise by the government to give you something. What? Don't ask the question, because there is no answer to that question at all. There's no answer to it. It's a useless question, and quite frankly, the bits of paper are useless. They work with the storekeeper, and that way they're useful. But in an explanatory way, it's useless, because they'll give you something. What will they give you? Nothing. So, should I go on to government bonds as well? I should stop there, but I'm on a roll. Government bonds. Yeah, because this is important, because we're all now dealing in the real world with austerity and shit like that. So, the government runs books, double entry bookkeeping type books, assets, liabilities, got to balance them, incomings, outgoings. So incomings, if they're not as big as the outgoings, there's a difference, and that difference is the deficit. And if there's a deficit, they've got to borrow money to plug that deficit gap. Okay, so the government goes, well, you give me back those bits of paper that says I'm going to give you something, and I'll give you another piece of paper back saying I'll give you the same, that back, that I wasn't going to give you anyway, and I'll give you even more of them. In other words, interest, which is what I just said was you give me $10 and I'll give you $11 back, interest on the debt. They've sold a bond. It was one piece of paper that said, I'll give you 10 of these somethings, and you get a bond back which says, I'll not only give you 10 of these somethings in 30 years' time, I'll give you an extra piece of paper back as well that says, I'll give you even more things. Because that's what all these bits of paper are. They're things the government have signed saying, I will give you something. But nobody knows at all what the government's going to give you. And the moronic thing is that the government deficits take back in these bits of paper that says the government's going to give you something, and give out another piece of paper saying the government's going to give you even more, when the government is not going to give you anything at all. The whole system is totally and utterly mad. It worked for the 1% in the 17th century. And why we're still doing it is a total mystery. But it just seems, and I think it's because of extra energy being dug out of the ground, that really the world has been so swimmingly, wonderfully, can't go bloody wrong with all this new energy coming online, that it hasn't really mattered. We've basically been able to screw up and have the most wild and stupid and crazy systems for doing things, and it really hasn't mattered, because all this coal energy, oil energy, natural gas energy has been coming on to be used by the brains of humans, and has covered up the madness of all these systems. but that might be coming to an end, and we might ask again with our little bits of paper, what is the government going to give us for these little bits of paper, or what are these little bits of paper? And there is no answer. Bye.